Buenos dias. I know 2 words now. Gracias. Well, welcome back. For those of you who were here yesterday, which I'm assuming most of you were, I'm going to spend today giving you some examples of what you can do in your classroom. I wanted to make sure to put up, if you take a look at the slide that's on the screen, if you wanted to take a picture of that, that includes, it will include I need to upload because the service was a little slow, but the SlideShare link will have a copy of these slides. The URI Academia website has lots and lots of papers and examples of the things that I'm going to mention today. And the last link is information related to a 3-day workshop that I do on critical evaluation and lots of activities that teachers can do in your classroom. So unfortunately, in the hour that we have, I'm going to introduce you to a lot of examples, but it's going to go pretty fast. And so if you're interested and are looking for more examples and to really spend some more time with that, take a look at the third link, and that will really give you an idea of the types of strategies that I work on with teachers, trying them out in classrooms. And I'll put that up at the end as well. So where are we headed in the next hour or so? Yesterday, I hope that I didn't depress you, but I shared with you all the things that we're finding students don't know. And as depressing as it is that 80% of students don't seem to know a lot of these things, another 20 to 30% of students are showing us and teaching us the strategies that are useful. We don't have a curriculum to go to, and so the research that I've done for the 6 or 7 years is just watching kids, talking with kids. If they don't know it, we kind of take the opposite and say, well, if only you could have done this, you might have been more successful. If they do know it, we ask them to think out loud to us and tell us what they're doing and why that's useful. And from that, we've started to develop some instructional practices that make sense. Understanding, though, that those practices are going to change as the technologies change and as the strategies and practices that children need change as well. But I also wanted to share with you how we're learning about those things in terms of 2 kinds of assessments. And when I say assessment, I really mean, and I'll talk about it in the next slide, assessment for inquiry purposes. It's not assessments that we take necessarily to score them and put their scores on a list and say, wow, this is really sad. It's much more about using assessment as a diagnostic tool for figuring out what don't my students know, what do my students know, and what can I do the next day? And so I'm going to share with you some examples of 2 federally funded projects that I've been working on to give you some ideas about that. And then at the very end, and like I said, I won't have enough time to talk deeply about a lot of things, but I hope to share 3 types of instructional models, if you will, that we've been exploring. So I wanted to start off by mentioning, if you're worried at all that technology will take over teachers, I'm here to tell you, at least from my perspective, I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, if anything, teachers matter more now. And so I wrote an article back in 2009 where I was asked to do a literature review of all of the studies around the world that were examples of teachers using technology effectively. And I realized 2 things. One, there aren't a lot of studies, as we might think, that are really measuring effectiveness. But what there are lots of case studies, of stories, of anecdotal evidence. And so I call them promising practices. I believe they hold a lot of promise. There hasn't necessarily been research to validate those ideas, but the 4 patterns that I found that seem to be the most promising, the first one is to be able to be very, very explicit with students about the similarities and differences between what we're calling offline reading, how do you read and talk and engage with a book, and online reading. So it's not it's necessarily better or worse, or it's not that the book will go away, but we spend a lot of time teaching kids typically about printed texts. And for some reason, we just kind of assume that they'll figure out those features and affordances and constraints in an online world. And one of the things I've noticed is, just like everybody else is saying, if we bring it up to the conversation and engage children and students in dialogue about the similarities and differences, it will, if nothing else, create an awareness that there's different types of texts and different ways to read. The second that I think lots of the other presenters have been talking about is to honor the literacies that students bring from out of school. There's wonderful ways that they're reading and writing and communicating and creating. And it's not that we necessarily have to teach all of those things in our classroom, but especially as students get into middle school and high school, they get unmotivated, they get disengaged. And just like every adolescent, they want to do things that are devious or not always happening in schools. But as they're doing those things out of school, they're learning new literacies that we can validate in school to say, maybe you do things differently than we do in school, but those are important literacies that I need to recognize as a more traditional teacher. And I've had students tell me, if you validate what I know, I'll start to listen to what you know. And so it's a little bit of that identity, some motivation wrapped up in being really explicit about what we want them to learn. Along the way comes the need to clarify new roles and relationships. Maybe, for the most part, it's not that I stand up here and tell you, as much as create scenarios and opportunities for you to wonder and grapple with things and struggle and come to some new understandings by yourself. And so that means we have to figure out new ways to teach. How do we step out of the limelight and bring students into working in groups in different ways? And so there's all kinds of new rules and expectations that sometimes nobody tells us. And I think Daniel showed us yesterday and today, it's not just a matter of putting computers into the classroom. There's brand new relationships that happen that we have to figure out how to navigate. And we have to be open with students to say, you know what, I don't really know how to do this. And we're going to figure it out together. And the other thing is what I just mentioned, this idea of assessment as inquiry. How do we engage our learners in assessing themselves, monitoring? Does this make sense? And it's okay if it doesn't, but you need to let us know. You're not going to lose points. It's not about points or scores. It's about understanding what they know and what they don't know so I can figure out what to teach tomorrow. So that's my little lecture about the teacher still matters a lot. Yesterday, we talked about some of the challenges. So just to remind you, this is kind of a summary of what kids are telling us I don't know how to do. I don't know how to ask questions. My teacher wants to know what I want to know about. I don't know because you always used to tell me what I'm supposed to want to know about. Which search words do I use? Now we get to locating and generating search terms and picking the right search tool. And again, Daniel said sometimes it's Google, sometimes it's encyclopedias, sometimes it's dictionaries. When I get there, where do I read first? In terms of evaluating, every time I go to a new web page, there's maybe 5 links, there's maybe 50 links. Which one should I follow and why? How do I know when I get somewhere that the information is true? What's the author's purpose? How do I come up with an original idea? Everybody tells me I'm not supposed to copy paste. But how do I come up with an original idea when there's already 1.2 million websites written about that topic? And how do I share it with others? These are the questions that 5-year-olds are asking us and 25-year-olds are asking us. So, what do we do when we start to find readers that actually know how to do these things? And so what I've been doing, again, is watching readers when they're faced with these challenges and find out what they do. I'm going to list for you the findings from a research project, and then I'll share at the end just the document where you can start to access all of this. I'm going to highlight a few, but if I were to start to define a curriculum, these might be the elements that would be included in there. So good online readers, in terms of asking questions, know what a really good question is. They know how to revise and reword that question to make it better. And they know how to not get distracted and remember the question that they started with to find their answers and solve their problems. In terms of locating information, I know how different search engines work, and I know which search engine is best for my needs. Do I want words? Do I want images? Do I want video? Do I want audio? You don't find it the same way. I know simple strategies for making my search more specific, maybe adding another word or taking a word off. And I know sometimes advanced search strategies, and those are the things that continue to change. What was novel and new and hard today, maybe next month, some search engine will have figured it out and now it's automatic. In terms of evaluating information, what I found is there's kind of 6 areas of critical evaluation. The first one is understanding. Good readers know when information makes sense. That's not a surprise. It's that monitoring that we try to teach kids in books. When you read, is this making sense? Yes. Continue. If not, stop. Go back and make sense. In terms of relevance, I know when information meets my needs. And so when we talk with kids about how did you know to click on that link rather than another, they tell us things that align with, oh, so you're actually thinking about your needs, you're looking at this new information and matching it, or seeing it that it doesn't match and going somewhere else. I know how to verify information with another source. So this whole process of validating the information you find at one website with another. But be careful not to get tricked, because websites multiply so quickly now. As teachers, we used to say, if you can find 3 resources that say the same thing, great. This idea that Alana was alluding to yesterday, I know that everyone shapes information, and I know how to evaluate that. I know how to talk about that, and I know how to think about what's missing, what's not being represented in the information that's being shared. And then this notion, and I don't know how this translates, but of being a healthy skeptic, somebody who's just naturally not trusting of the world, but just being a little bit skeptical and not just buying everything that you find and hear. So in terms of synthesis, we know that good online readers who are now becoming writers or creators of information know how to construct information I need as I read selected information. So yesterday we talked about the notion that as you click on links, you are literally building a text. And so good readers approach online inquiry and research by actively selecting links that will construct a whole text of combined texts that help them gather the information they need. They also know which information to ignore. And I talked about that yesterday. Often, we see in younger readers especially, they start at the top of a website and read every single word. And we know when we're first searching and trying to look for information, and the electricity goes out, we know sometimes we have to figure out what not to pay attention to. The last thing that a good synthesizer needs to know, and this is very, very hard, is I know when to stop. I know when I have my answer, and as exciting as it could be to find another 100 things about that, unless you've got time to find another 100 things, you probably have enough. And so that's the question: when do I have enough for my purpose in the audience? Sometimes enough might represent one perspective. Sometimes enough might represent two opposing points of view. And sometimes enough might require 3 or 4 or 5 different lenses, depending on what your purpose is. And then also connected to purpose and audience is good online readers. As they read, think about their purposes for writing. Who will I be communicating to? Which pieces of the text am I going to pull out that are relevant for that audience? And then which communication tool is going to be most useful for integrating that information and sharing it with the audience? Will it be another text? Will it be a video? Will it be a podcast? And those are conscious decisions that we need to start to think about as a reader to connect it to writing. 2 more big, important things. When I communicate, I know how not to make people upset with me, from the way I write and the way I create my message. So that might be, I know as a professor, I don't necessarily care if people are extremely formal with me, but it might be nice if you put a subject line and just a little something in the message rather than just sending me your homework and a blank message with an attachment. It just, to me, it just doesn't show, just a little respect would be nice. And so it's that kind of a thing. Now that we have a global audience that we're talking with, am I aware enough of your culture, your beliefs, your religion, whatever it is that might impact how you receive my message? That now becomes important for readers who will be writers. So it gets really, really complicated. I know you can't see this right now, but it might be coming back. If you're interested in those kinds of effective practices, what we've done is put together a document that, yay, just in time. This is the address. This is the shorter address, but I want to show it to you for just a second, and I know you won't be able to read most of it. But the idea here is, when we started to implement these things in classrooms, teachers needed a way to know how to move from one level of instruction to the other. So they used a checklist, for lack of a better way to start. And in the beginning, I know Daniel yesterday was talking about, at the very beginning, kids don't know how to get along when they're in small groups and being able to use computers. So some of those skills are about cooperating and exchanging ideas, but others are simple things like when we started, we had kids on an Apple computer. There's an icon for the hard drive, and kids were taking the hard drive and dragging it to the trash can because they just didn't know. And so kids were also opening their friends' documents and deleting them, or changing them. So we had to talk about ethics and responsibility, and you think they know these things, but they just don't. They don't transfer them sometimes from real life to technology. So we call that kind of a phase one checklist. Do they know these basics? You can't move on and expect kids to write collaboratively in a Google Docs, for example. If there's one child who gets in and just deletes everybody's information, it doesn't work. So you have to teach some of those things. Once that's done, and again, I know you won't be able to read this, but you can access this, and it'd be wonderful if we could have it translated into Spanish. There's questions and skills, if you will, or practices that you can then design tasks around, and I'll show you how to do this in just a second, depending on, do you want to teach your students how to question? Do you want to teach your students how to locate information in search results? Maybe you want to teach your students how to locate information within a website, or critically evaluate, or different ways of synthesizing. The danger in sharing something like this, though, is we're not suggesting that you pick a skill and say, today we're going to learn how to do this skill. Don't do it that way. I'm going to give you an example of a much more effective way that also taps into what Daniel talked about in terms of authentic experiences. So I'm going to jump into the next part of my talk, but understand that that document is there for you to shape and reshape in the ways that you think are useful for your students. Okay, I'll move on, and if you want at the end, I can also put it up again. So before we go into the teaching practices, I want to talk about this idea of assessment. And again, it's not assessment for testing, it's the assessment that's going to inform your instruction. And so you can't decide at which phase to start your instruction unless you know which students need what. So, how do we know what online readers know and are able to do? I want to share 2 projects and a quick few examples, and we write about many more of these in the articles that I write. One is a project that I actually worked on with Dave Ranking called TICA, Teaching Internet Comprehension to Adolescents. And what we did was we took all those things that we knew children weren't very good at, and we made them requirements as part of a task. So we set up a task that we knew they would not know how to do. Now that might seem strange, but the whole idea is to set up a real authentic task. Kids teach each other because some kids do know, and they listen to other kids much more than they listen to teachers. But if it's real and motivating and they want to know how to solve the problem, they'll then turn to you and say, I don't know how to do that, will you teach me? And then we're ready with a small lesson or two, what we call mini lessons. So the idea, and Daniel gave many examples of what I might call curriculum-based online information challenges. You take the content that you already have to teach, and you create an information problem that requires students to ask questions, locate, evaluate, synthesize, and communicate. But in the beginning, you don't require all those things. Maybe you pick one. I want you to locate something, and I want you to communicate it. And I don't care if it's true or false. I just want to know, can you find something relevant and use an email message? Or can you find a picture that represents something and post it to a blog? Once I've got the locating and communicating pieces, then we can start to do something exciting. What happens along the way is, because from a new literacies perspective, we believe that children or students bring with them practices that they can teach us. We set up opportunities for those students to teach us strategies. So we do not stand up in front of the computer in the class and say, this is how you do it. We tried that, and it didn't work, because many times students knew things that we didn't know. So basically what we do is we create a scenario We have children work in small groups. When they get stuck, we might stop and say, does anybody know how to do that? But actually, I'm kind of what's called people watching, and I know somebody in the class that knows how to do that. And so I ask them, can you show us what you're doing? And we have a system, you may or have something like this, we call it Apple Remote Desktop, where if we have 5 laptops in the room and a projector, rather than seeing my computer on the screen, if you're doing something good in your group, I can put your computer on the screen, and then you teach us. And so what happens is the kids who know what to do teach us. And even if nobody knows what to do, I say, who's willing to take a risk and tell us what you're stuck on? And so we turn the computer to that group, and I say, tell us where you're stuck. What are your questions? And those becomes the questions that we problem solve together. So that's the essence of this. And so kids work in small groups, and the whole idea is to minimize the talk that we do as teachers and to maximize the talk and the engagement that students bring to these scenarios. Does that make sense a little bit? So these are just some quick examples, but I'll get to some pictures of some more interesting things in a second. For example, in an English class, we were studying biographies. So we have this game in the United States called Jeopardy, where you kind of attach pretend money to levels of questions. And so while they're studying biographies or talking about critical evaluation strategies, they post their answers to the challenges on a blog. So they're learning how to communicate, they're learning their content about biographies, and they're talking about critical evaluation. So we don't forget about our content, but we try to introduce technologies and new practices into that. Another example might be doing a research project about learning about respiratory scientists. And they actually learn how to add information to, yes, the real Wikipedia site. So we had 3rd graders posting information after doing their research to add on to what maybe experts were writing about scientists on Wikipedia. So they learned exactly how easy it was to add information to Wikipedia. They learned the benefits, and they also practiced putting up information that wasn't accurate. And they quickly learned that somebody else is going to be passionate enough about that topic, and they're going to get in and make their wrong information right. And so we don't have to stand up there and talk about the benefits and the challenges of Wikipedia. The kids learn as they go through their content. So let me give you a different example. We did that for 2 or 3 years, and we started to get an idea of what was easy and what was hard. And I don't have the reference, but Dave Ranking actually has worked as part of a team now in a middle school, and they've written an article that really illustrates what are the powers of this kind of project and what are some of the challenges, because it's not easy. So after we learned about some of the things that kids do and don't do, we now have been working on a federal research project for 5 years, we're in our 5th year, of designing assessments that are performance-based that walk children through a whole hour task. And we assign points to their ability to locate, critically evaluate, synthesize, and communicate. And this is one of the scenarios. In the beginning, we surveyed kids about things that were popular or interesting. And one of the things that they loved was energy drinks. So we decided, well, the president of the school board has sent you an email and asking your opinion about whether or not she should ban energy drinks in your school. But you can't just give your opinion. You have to go find evidence that says, I think we shouldn't ban energy drinks because, or I think we should because. And then in this case, they had to communicate their responses back to the school board member in a very professional email. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through some screenshots just so you can see what the interface looks like. Generally, we created a search engine called Google, It works like Google, but we have about 800 sites in that system. They still read and navigate real websites. They have notepads, and I'll talk about how we avoid copy-paste. And it sits in a Facebook interface that uses chat and an avatar who communicates back and forth with them. And then some of the tasks ask them to communicate answers in an email, and others they have to compose a wiki space or add to it. So we're trying to create the authentic environments that they already are working in or should be working in to conduct research and assess students. So again, you probably can't read all of this, but basically it starts out with this avatar who explains some of the problem in Facebook. And this is where children have to click and read the directions and figure out, first they have to find the right email, and then they have to, what's important in the email for me to figure out this problem? So we don't just say, here's what you need. We give them some stuff they need and some stuff they don't, and they have to read to figure it out. Then they go back into the Facebook interface, and we tell them, please find this very specific article. It was published in this date, and this is the publisher. And then we get to see how they do searches. We get to see, and this is all as a video that I'll show you the link to. You can watch a student. We can see them put their search terms in. This is what the Google search results look like. We put ads right at the beginning. Some kids click just on whatever they see. And we program the order that the search results come in because we know that normally kids just click on the first link. So the first link is never the right answer in our search block. Here's the place where, and you can't really see the website, but what happens is they take this, there's a notepad, and as they go to each website, they write their notes here. In the beginning, they were copy-pasting whole paragraphs. So we turned off, there you go, how fitting. We turned off the ability to copy-paste. And then we made the text box smaller. So you could only put in, welcome to tweets and Twitter, a certain number of characters. So you had to be able to identify the most important idea from that article and fit it in that box. And so we sent them to 4 different websites to do that. And then we asked them, after they took their notes, to put their synthesis of all 4 of those notes into the Facebook prompt. I know you can't see, unfortunately, but we use the chat feature of Facebook to send them to a particular website and ask them to tell us who the author is. What's their point of view? Do you think they're an expert? And how reliable is the information? And that's where I got those answers that I showed you yesterday that were kind of depressing. But some kids actually know how to do that. And I know you can't see the next slide, but then at the end, the students write a small email that gives their evidence and backs up their claims, has to find the appropriate way to write a letter. So they get points for their subject line, they get points for the correct email, and they get points for the tone and the content of their message. So I'm just going to keep clicking, and maybe it will come back on. There's also a multiple choice version of this that we know isn't quite as valid because it's a lot harder to use the internet than just selecting the right choice. But there is a multiple choice version that we take screenshots at certain places and ask them A, B, C, or D. It looks like it might come back up. So this is what the multiple choice, I know it's coming in here, it might come over there soon. This is what the multiple choice for the search engine looks like. Here's your search results. Would you select A, B, C, or D if you could select one thing? Now, all I'm going to do here, we don't have enough time, and I won't show you if you can't see it, but there is a video that I have given you a link for that you can watch a very skilled online reader take about 25 minutes, and you can drag the video and see how the whole interface works. So I'm not suggesting, because it took us 4 years to be able to develop this interface, that you have to do all that. But there's little mini tasks in there that you can allow kids to communicate information. And there's many programs, but one of them is called Camtasia, C-A-M-T-A-S-I-A, Camtasia, that you can record what students are doing on the screen. And so they can do anything they want, and you can record it, and then they can bring it back to you and tell you what they think they did well, or tell you what they struggled with. And those can become your reading group activities, talking about effective strategy use when they're reading online. And so that gives you a little sense of the assessment piece. Maybe it'll come back up. How much time do I have? About 10 minutes left? It's over there. Do I have about 10 minutes left? 10, 5? Okay. So, how do we do this? It's coming back in a few places. One of the ideas is this idea that we're calling internet reciprocal teaching. Now, this is really complicated to explain. And I don't suggest that this is the only idea, but this is something that we were trying. And really quickly, just so you see, reciprocal teaching has been one of the most effective instructional models, at least in the United States, that has shown very, very good results. So we took that method and we applied it to the internet. So rather than the teacher modeling everything, the students modeled. Rather than focusing on predicting and questioning and clarifying, we took the 5 skills that we're talking about. And here's the tricky part, because it's so complex, we turned one phase of instruction into 3 phases. And those 3 phases really are very teacher-directed, explicit instruction in the beginning, but very short lessons. And then as quickly as possible, we move children into small group activities that are too hard for them, but we're there to support them with quick mini lessons when they need it. And the ultimate goal is to be able to conduct inquiry by themselves. And so this is really what all these things say, is just it breaks it down into 3 phases. First, modeling and practicing, learning about cooperation. Second, as quickly as possible, getting them into authentic tasks and authentic communication tools. And third, giving them real opportunities to conduct inquiry, first in their class and then with others. I put all of these slides up on the slide share, so you will be able to access all of them, because I'm going to move pretty quickly now, just to give you some examples. So I want to mention this. Raise your hand if you work with children who are ages 3 to 10. Okay? This is something I've done with this age of children, and it's worked quite well, even if you don't have any power in your classroom. Okay? It's called Internet Inquiry Baskets. And what you do is you put a basket in your classroom, and anytime a child asks a question, and you encourage them to wonder, you write down the question and you put it in the basket. On the last day of the week, you pick one, and you go home, and you do an internet search and try to find relevant things for your children. Now, the point is not to have you do all the work. The point is, as you're working, you're thinking about, how am I going to model this process to 4-year-olds or 8-year-olds? So you're going to pay attention to the keywords you used. You're going to pay attention to the search engine you picked. You're going to pay attention to the steps you took to locate. And you're going to pay attention to the website title and the website address. And you're going to use that vocabulary when you talk to children about it. We talk to them about the cover of a book, the author, the index. But when we ask middle school kids about what's the title of the website or the website address, many of them look at us like we're crazy. They don't know what those words mean. Then what you do is you come back. Now this part does assume you have some power, but it doesn't have to model quite like this. You model the practice and you show them exactly what you did to find the answer to a question. You work on summarizing, you work on evaluating, and you work on communicating. And the last piece is to take that little person who asked that question, pair them up with a parent or another teacher or yourself, and they reflect on what they learned and they create a product that becomes part of a book. It's the I Wonder book. So this is an example of Justine, who's 3. In the United States, where we have cherry blossom trees. And we were reading a book about cherry blossom trees, but it didn't have any pictures. And so she said, Mrs. Coiro, what does a cherry blossom tree look like? And I said, Justine, that's a great question. And I don't have the answer right now, but if you wait 2 days, I'll come back and give you some information, and then you can tell us what you learned. And so this is Justine's answer. She typed in with some help with spelling. She helped find the picture to represent her idea of cherry blossom trees. She learned about the 3 phases of the buds, so now we can link this to science. Even though it's a picture, she doesn't have to read. And so this is an example of what you can, once a week or once a month even, start to compile this information, and children can see 2 things. 1, the power of their questions. I asked a question, and it was important enough to put down, and I can share it with somebody else. And 2, there's enough documentation that we could learn some really neat things with the internet. So that's at a younger age level. Now, I wanted to highlight this because I just got this in my email last night. For those of you who don't have power, this is a class in Mexico. No power again. We're really being authentic here. This is a school in Mexico where all of the children and their parents live in a garbage dump. They have no power, they have no electricity, they have no nothing. They do have questions. So they come to school and they ask their teacher these questions. And the teacher goes home and one by one finds an answer to the question and comes back and teaches their children about it. And so the kids are learning how to ask questions, they're learning about the power of the internet, and they're building new knowledge, and they've never even necessarily seen the internet. So it's one small example of something that's happening right now in Mexico. And the interesting thing about this, the reason that it was so publicized, is this class, I think it was last year, had 90% of their students pass the standardized assessment in their country. And one of the girls in this class was the top scorer in all of Mexico. And they live in a garbage dump. So again, not that that magic happens all the time, but if we can give kids the power to ask questions about things that the internet can some way help us learn and grow, I think that's really powerful. How much time do I have? Am I out of time? 5 minutes? Okay. I'm going to give you a different example of really quickly. I just want to show you, so how do you move from a 3-year-old task to a high school task? And I have slides that give examples. So this is an information challenge where you have to locate, find something that's relevant, and communicate it. We send them to a particular website. We link it to their learning and goals about the economics. We send them to a different country. We build in some critical literacy about why this website about Japan doesn't say anything bad about Japan. Okay, so we build this into the task. We give kids the opportunity to do it, and then along the way they struggle and we come and we teach them different things. A little bit later, I showed you that tree octopus site yesterday. These are 4th and 5th graders who speak primarily Spanish in California, and their task was, one of these sites was real and 2 were pretend. Okay, here's an authentic task. Your family wants to take a dog-friendly vacation. You want to bring your dog with you. Where should you go? Okay, this dog island is a whole pretend website that dogs live all by themselves. Okay, there's another one about a camp that's for dogs, and there's a third about a real place. So this is appropriate strategies or content that we can start to teach kids. Again, this task is only critically evaluate or communicate. We don't worry about search engine skills. We bring them right to the 3 sites because critical evaluation is so hard. We don't want to get them overwhelmed with all the searching. This is too complicated to explain in the time we have left, but the idea basically is, oh, thank you. You start really small, again, locate and communicate. Then I want you to locate something that's actually relevant, because some kids will locate stuff that's irrelevant, and that's okay. That's part of the lesson. And kids have to judge, well, Alexandra brought in this website. Do you think it's relevant? Why or why not? A little bit later, you ask them to locate 2 websites, both with information that are relevant, and they have to put important information from 2 into a synthesis statement. So now we've got locate, synthesize, communicate. Then it becomes harder because I'm going to send you to websites that have completely different information. What one person says conflicts with the other. And that's when you have to start to think about, well, like the Dog Island case, is the information even accurate? Or are all of these websites accurate? They just represent different perspectives around the world, different perspectives from times in history, whatever the case may be. And at the very, very end comes this idea of now that maybe we've spent 2 or 3 months, or 4 or 5 months, or 2 or 3 grades, locate, evaluate, synthesize, and communicate, you design tasks that embed all of those skills. And you can use that taxonomy, that curriculum guide, if you will, that doesn't tell you what to teach or how to teach as much as you pull in the things that you want to touch on in your lesson. So I'll just give you, now we're in secondary school. This is an example of locate, evaluate, relevancy, and communicate in a history class. Locate the name of one American who might be considered a hero of the Civil War. Provide an explanation of what makes that person a hero. Send your partner an email with the name you located, evidence from the text that supports your opinion, and the address of the website. Can you start to see how those little things that they weren't very good at, we now embed into one task that builds printed reading comprehension, online reading comprehension and communication, and content, in this case about the Civil War. A little bit later, what's the main cause of global warming? Find a website that gives you an answer. Then find a website that gives you a different answer. And which answer do you think is most accurate and why? Now it means I have to start looking at who wrote that website and from what lens did they write it. And so rather than starting with the lesson and say, today we're going to learn about how to tell the difference between 2 websites, we dump them into a problem that nobody tells them necessarily what we're going to learn, and you have to figure it out. But you as a skilled teacher embedded in the skills that you want to work on. I'll just give you some pictures so you see what this looks like. So this is how we gave the task. Students will use the internet to research various countries and complete a table to organize the data they found. So each group had a country, they had a question, they had to communicate it into a table and synthesize it. You'll notice here, this is where we're valuing the strategies that students bring. Jose taught us if you use define : in a search engine, you can actually get to the definitions of words. And so the kids are like, wow, let me try that. Somebody else said, if you use cite::gov, you can actually find certain kinds of websites. So we have the children put these ideas up on a chart and keep track of them. And then when they're doing work the next day, you say, well, what did Jose tell you? If you can't find it or don't remember, go ask Jose. And all of a sudden, you're not in control anymore, but it's in a good way. This is the messier version of what happens. But again, here's a student working in the phase where, I don't know, what do I even wonder about? And having help develop questions. Then they go back to their group and they work together. And the beauty is, they're not all going to the same website. They're going to 3 different places and then sharing. Along the way, I realized, some kids are struggling. So I stop the class for about 5 minutes and I do a quick mini lesson about some authentic struggle. Then they go back to work a little bit. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they work in small groups, and at the end of class, they share their findings. So that's kind of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. 3 minutes? Oh, okay. So now we move a little higher. And this is something called structured inquiry, where we don't provide any intervention at all, except a partner and a little bit of scaffolding in the scenario that we set up. So here's the directions generally. You pick an authentic, real task with an authentic response. You design a quick overview page that makes sure everybody has a little bit of background knowledge about that topic. You provide a safe search interface, and there's something called Google Safe Search, where you can take your 80 sites that you want them to search within, 40 that are relevant, 40 that are irrelevant but still appropriate, put them into those search engine results. And for a 3rd grader, even dealing with 80 search results is a lot. You add some multimodal sources of video for those kids who may not be able to read as well. You give them a partner and a set of steps. So here's an example. I'm sure you can't read that, but here's the authentic scenario. These are 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, so 8 to 10-year-olds in southern United States. There's this toy store called Toys R Us. And this is a true situation that the manager wants to set up part of the store to have toys that are made out of either recycled products or ecologically friendly products. So their job is to work with a partner, and here's the steps. Visit this overview page to learn why toys are harmful. Use the internet to search for toys that can be safer. Decide what information is most useful for your needs, and here's your purpose. What 4 eco-friendly toys do you think Toys R Us should sell in the new store? And they write an email to the manager of the store who responds, giving their toy choices and why they represent ecologically friendly toys. Along the way, kids know how to use search engines or struggle, and we provide a little intervention. Kids know how to read across multiple websites, or some kids don't, and we give another lesson. This might take about a week, but at the end, they've covered their science curriculum, they've covered their reading and writing curriculum, and they've covered their, if you will, new literacies curriculum. I know, again, you can't probably read all of this, but this is what the overview page looks like. And I want to share really quickly in the 1 or 2 minutes that I have left, one example of how we're looking at the quality of language. I talked yesterday about how dialogue has become important. And in the United States, we have a set of standards now that requires children to listen to what somebody else says in a conversation and build on it. So I'm going to set the scene for you because they're talking in English, but I think you'll get a sense. What we've been doing, you can see how we capture kids doing research, and we're looking at the quality of their talk and how do skilled partners work together to ask and provide information, to monitor when they don't understand, and then also provide strategic reading and questioning and inferring and clarifying. So in this example, it's about a minute or maybe even 30 seconds. These 2 boys who are 5th graders are learning about eco-friendly toys and a chemical that's really dangerous called PVC. And the little boy says, what the heck is PVC? And he clicks on a link, and they get to a really hard page of text. But they don't just read it all. They skim and they scan, and together they construct an understanding of what that acronym stands for, and as soon as they figure it out, they're back at their task. So let me play this. I'm not sure For the translator, there is English subtitles that go up at the top. We'll try this and see what happens, and I'm going to go on the... Thank you.
Okay, look, one question. What is PVC?
I have no idea.
I never knew what that was. I just, see it. Don't know what it is.
But let's ask if we can click on it.
Some people say it's poison plastic.
Billions of pounds of PVC is a poison plastic. So it's like
Basically,
plastic with
chemicals.
really bad chemicals.
Oh, right there. Polyben
Polyben chlorified plastic.
threatens public
Oh, that's
health.
what it is. That's what it stands for.
So is it sort of nuclear waste? Sort of kind of.
But not as bad.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as nuclear waste.
You don't want that.
Many toys are wrapped in large packaging materials that are thrown right into the garbage after they are opened. These materials take up space in landfills and under the ground. Don't buy anything that is made of PVC plastic. Choose toys that are made of natural or biodegradable materials that will not damage earth. Look for toys that are solar powered instead of toys that use batteries. Look for toys made of unpainted solid wood and finished with tongue oil or beeswax. Choose toys that are solidly constructed and will last long enough to give class to younger children, such as phthalate-free Legos, unpainted wood blocks, or dolls made from organic cotton or wool. Wow, why can't we use PVC plastic? What's wrong with that? Maybe when you throw it away, it does something that you don't like.
So you get a sense of how we're collecting data, where we can see what they're doing. We have another part that we're actually analyzing their affect and their body language. We can look at the quality of their language, the quality of their reading strategies, and then align the things that they're doing in the process with the actual product that they create. So that gives you a sense, again, of tasks, as well as from a research perspective, how we're learning about these things. And I'm going to skip for my last minute to give you an idea at the high level. Some of you yesterday said, so what could I do with high school students? Okay, this is an example. I don't know how many of you are aware, but in the United States during World War II, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, we decided that we had many Japanese Americans in our country, and we thought the smart thing to do was to take all the Japanese Americans and put them into basically prison camps in our country. And so the idea here is to point children to different perspectives of that experience. And so we set up a page, we give them some prior knowledge, we send them to some videos, and I'm sure you can't see this text, but we send them to, originally, the general, the day after in 1942, gave an explanation of why we needed to do this. We also have a website created by children who were actually in those camps to get their perspective. We also have just a middle school project where they just looked at secondary sources and wrote about it. We have an example of an individual who's anonymous, but explains that not only could this and did this happen before, but it could happen again. And then historically, I know Daniel talked about the differences in time. Now in 2001, this represents the time in American history where we publicly apologized and said, we realize we made a really big mistake. And so what happens is we divide our high school groups into small groups. Each investigates one of those websites with a set of questions about purpose and context and the author's lens. And then we ask them to come back as a group and share across the perspectives, put the ideas on a continuum, and most importantly, figure out, because they're going to be voters, where do you sit on these ideas? What do you think based on the evidence that you've read? And so this just gives you an example of the digital. We use something called Webspiration, which allows them to publicly comment on things. And the last example I'll just show you with this is the research that I'm doing right now with Karita Kieli in Finland, where we've created a digital interface to help children organize multiple perspectives. So here you only see one perspective, but because it's so hard to hold all that information in your brain, you can jot down the perspective here, so the perspective of the general right after the war. Arguments for the claim, they put their information here. There's a tool that asks them to critically evaluate how the level of reliability and write in their justification. Arguments against the claim, and then their synthesis. If they have one perspective, they're done. If they have two or more, the interface grows, and so visually they have an overall representation of all of the ideas, a quick visual reminder of what might be more or less critically appropriate, and then they compose their conclusion in the back here. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how we can do some things with 3- and 4-year-olds, also in high school, and the end result is the ability to question, search, critically evaluate, synthesize, and communicate all together. Do you remember yesterday when I shared you these examples? Well, this is what you can do now that they've overcome the challenges. All these opportunities are there for kids to make a difference, to create some kind of social action project, and to learn how to create digital content. I am going to stop here because I just put in case there are questions, 2 examples. But just to sum up, at this point we know quite a bit about what skilled and less skilled online readers know and can do. We're working on ways to support developing online readers, looking at the challenges and the successes of internet reciprocal teaching, practicing productive collaboration and conversation, and working on using digital tools to support this idea of argumentation, where evidence to support your claims. Again, if you're interested, there's a lot of activities at this website, and as I said yesterday, my end point is, as new technologies continue to redefine literacy, can we as teachers keep up with the challenge? So thank you very much, and I'm going to put this back at the beginning in case folks didn't get the addresses before. Thank you.
Me pareció muy interesante la conferencia, pero tengo una pregunta. Las actividades están clasificadas por grados y grupos de estudiantes, es decir, por niveles. ¿Qué hacer en los casos de algunas instituciones en que tenemos niños ya en el bachillerato y que ellos ni siquiera han alcanzado a desarrollar las habilidades lectoras que le corresponden, como por ejemplo como la inferencia, a un estudiante de básica primaria? Entonces, ¿es aconsejable pasar primero por el texto escrito o ir directamente a los recursos de lectura de la web? Muchas gracias.
A real good question. I represented one way of thinking about that. About the development that younger kids will be in phase 1 and older kids will be in phase 3. However, much like was the case in the grant that we worked on, we have older students who can't decode, who can't cooperate, who can't make inferences. And so I would recommend starting with, again, those questions. So you would start with the phase 1, but with the older kids. And your tasks would just become more authentic for that kind of a classroom. And so this isn't something that you would do every day. Again, it might be once a week, but in some cases, it might be used as the springboard for going back and teaching other skills, because now they're interested, they're intrigued, and they have a reason to learn how to decode or know these certain vocabulary terms. And at other times, you might teach something with the anticipation that learning those skills, they'll be able to participate in a project like that. So it's certainly not easy, but do recognize that we have evidence to suggest that there are elementary children who can and are doing phase 3 kinds of things, and there are high school students who can't do phase 1.
¿Preguntas? Por allí tienen otra inquietud, adelante.
Doctora Coiro, me gustó muchísimo la presentación, felicitaciones, conocía un poco del trabajo del proyecto TICA y lamento que un estudiante que está trabajando con esta línea de estrategias de manejo de información no pudo venir, porque a través de él conocí su trabajo. Tenía inquietudes que al final quedaron resueltas un poco con las muestras que dio, y es un poco en relación con lo que presentaba la profesora anterior, y es cómo integrar a lo largo de este esquema de estrategias de manejo de información las estrategias de lectura y de escritura. Los profesores de primera y segunda lengua trabajamos mucho sobre las estrategias cognitivas, metacognitivas de lectura, de preparación a la escritura, entonces cómo integrarlas. A lo largo de la presentación y pude ir viendo cómo van integrando ustedes a través de las herramientas esas estrategias. Entonces esa era mi inquietud, pero realmente pude darme cuenta al final cómo lo hacen, y encuentro pues que es una propuesta muy, muy interesante. Y bueno, en realidad por ahora no tengo preguntas. Gracias.
I can comment real quickly on that in terms of integrating reading strategies, and one of the articles that I wrote has to do with a think aloud model. And so what I do is try to provide for teachers an explanation of how to move through an online inquiry task and thinking aloud about both traditional, if you will, reading strategies, whether they're making inferences or making connections or synthesizing information, as well as thinking aloud about online reading strategies. And so, again, not that it's designed to be a script, but it's a way for you to start to use those research-based practices about modeling cognitive strategies in a way that tap into both offline or traditional foundational reading strategies as much as new, if that helps a little bit. So there are ways of building that in. There's a lot of dialogue and conversation that takes place that's prompted by internet texts, but that's again where we move away from just focusing only on the text and we step back and think about what it means to process that information.
Cuando están haciendo la investigación, cada estudiante, entonces ellos van a diferentes websites y cada uno obtiene una información distinta. Por ejemplo, los niños cuando estaban hablando del PVC, lo que él estaba diciendo era totalmente equivocado. ¿En qué momento él siguió buscando, investigando? ¿En qué momento yo como docente le digo, no, o sea, totalmente equivocado, porque es una información que él obtuvo del internet y que se puede convertir en su realidad, pero le estoy distorsionando la realidad que realmente es? ¿En qué momento yo digo, no, eso no es como? Y cuando yo tengo 30 niños, ¿en qué momento me siento con ellos y llego a un acuerdo común de cuál es la definición, el tema concreto? Porque la enseñanza debe ser real.
It's a very, very important question, and that's what we're dealing with right now is when and how to intervene. And so I don't have all the answers for sure, but one of the advantages of having kids work in small groups, once you've started to build some of their awareness of different processes, in this case, evaluating if it's relevant or not, or evaluating if it's reliable or not, you remind them to be working and monitoring each other's work in their group as a middle stage, so you can't be everywhere at the same time. But often what happens is, let's say we know that that's a problem, that many students are finding information that is either not relevant or not accurate. We can make that the focus of the lesson. So tomorrow, we might say, we're going to set the purpose, and I've been noticing some of you are finding really relevant and accurate information. And I've been noticing that some of you are finding information that might not be accurate. But today, I want to see if you can start to notice that. So as you're working in your groups, be thinking you're going to have about 10 minutes to look for a website, and then we're going to come back into the group and we're going to go through each group, and you're going to share the one website you think is reliable and relevant and explain why. And the other groups are going to make a decision about whether your claims are valid or if we need help. And so that's a way to build some of that responsibility onto students. But I'm there as a support if you found a website that was inaccurate and nobody else picked up on it, then I might jump into well, let's look a little closer because I think there might be something there that you're missing. And then I would maybe have a 5-minute instruction, okay? And then maybe we would set a list of 2 criteria. So, for example, in the beginning stages, I might say to students, so this information isn't really accurate, but how can we start to figure that out? One strategy might be able to look for the author and try and learn the level of expertise that author even has. And so I'm going to teach you, I'm going to show you how to do it in this website, and then I want you to go back in your groups and take that one website that you found and be prepared tomorrow, if we run out of time, to give some evidence about the level of expertise of your author. So do you see how each time I'm trying to kind of determine what students bring in terms of their knowledge, figure out what they don't know, tap into the knowledge of all the students in the classroom, and then when they need support, I'm there within that authentic task with just a little bit of instruction, just enough to get them back into the task. Does that make sense?
Eso comprueba que no importa qué tan avanzada tecnología tengamos, el maestro no lo van a reemplazar, porque ahí tenemos que estar nosotros para conducir eso.
¿Alguien tiene más preguntas? Continuemos con esta jornada por allí.
Buenos días. Muy buena exposición. Me gustaría saber, precisamente teniendo muy en cuenta su intervención y como llegando a una conclusión, es que el maestro debe ser un maestro proactivo, que esté constantemente inmerso en detectar y en sacar un diagnóstico en la lectura y escritura de sus estudiantes y debe estar en un constante acompañamiento. Mi pregunta es, ¿qué hacer con el contexto de los bibliotecarios escolares? Porque realmente el bibliotecario escolar no tiene la misma capacidad de estar constantemente con el alumno, sino ciertas oportunidades, ciertas clases, digamos, acá en Colombia la biblioteca escolar está concebida de una manera muy pragmática, muy práctica, se está tratando de cambiar ese imaginario de la promoción de la lectura, de ser un recurso para llegar de una mejor manera a la información, pero cómo hacer que la promoción de la lectura y tener una buena búsqueda, una buena comprensión de lectura sea posible en un bibliotecario escolar, teniendo muy en cuenta este modelo. Gracias.
Very, very nice, and something that I just finished a year's worth of work trying to explore. I think it's a similar situation in the United States where we have classroom teachers who know a set of skills and often know how to teach reading. And at least in the United States, we have librarians who often are trained as what we call library media specialists, and they are very skilled at the kinds of things that we're talking about. And so what we've tried to do, first off, is to bring the librarian into the classroom, not the other way around, okay? So bring the librarian into the classroom and have some co-teaching opportunities and some planning time beforehand where it's a partnership that needs to be developed to figure out, what do I know as a regular classroom teacher, if you will, and what don't I know? What do I know as a librarian, and what don't I know? And how can we combine our lessons together? And so I just have some really interesting evidence from a high school librarian and a science teacher as well as a psychology teacher, and their attempts to co-teach, sometimes in the classroom with a focus on the content, and sometimes in the library where there's multiple computers or a computer lab and they can teach other parts. But there's a very big connection between the teachers and between the content, which is key, because when we think about students, if you think about cognitive psychology, often when you're sitting in a classroom, you remember the things that happen in that situation. But then when you go down the hall to the next classroom, you only remember the things that happen in that situation. So if we can create opportunities for the same vocabulary, the same learning or companion pieces of skills in the classroom and in the library, I think will be much more beneficial. We've also worked on building relationships with parents and bringing them into the picture, because in many places, kids go home and they don't have computers at home. But there are computers in the town libraries. And so then it becomes an issue of, can and will the parents bring their children to the public libraries? And if they do, how can the parents play a role in understanding some beginning reading strategies and some beginning new online reading kinds of things to make it a partnership between the students, the parents, the teachers, and the librarians?
¿Preguntas?
Desde su proyecto, ¿cómo se vivencia la integración curricular? ¿Cómo interactúan los profesores en pos de una investigación, de una temática concreta?
They do a lot of planning together. And so, much like the librarian and a teacher, let's say the history teacher, let's take the history example I had. A history teacher and an English teacher might meet, and the English teacher might say, well, I have to read and teach my kids how to read fiction and how to write an argumentation essay. That's my curriculum. And the history teacher says, well, I have to teach them about, World War II and this particular perspective of Japanese internment camps. And so together they craft, whether it's one lesson or a week's worth of lessons, and then often they'll use that taxonomy that we created to go back and think about, what online reading skills do we want to focus on? Maybe we don't care about questioning right now because we're going to define the questions. And maybe we don't care about locating because I'm going to find the websites, but we very much care about critical evaluation and synthesis. So my task is going to focus on that. Another time, at the beginning of a unit, it might be that teachers want to prompt questions. And so that's the focus. So the teachers meet, they think about what each of their standards and their curriculum requires, possible either overlaps or companions, that I can do one thing here and it will build on that, and then how do I work in those different online reading strategies, again, to design a task that fits in all those different pieces.
¿Quién más tiene alguna inquietud, duda?
Yo creo que la caracterización o rol del docente no ha cambiado, ni antes de las TIC ni ahora. El docente como intelectual protagónico, que tiene algo de padre, algo de psicólogo, de bibliotecario, que tiene un saber específico. Bueno, yo tengo la fortuna de ser docente en la mañana y ser bibliotecaria en la tarde. Mi biblioteca está ubicada en una vereda de Girón. Se llama la Biblioteca Antonia Santos. Entonces, por la mañana comparto con los estudiantes, el colegio queda más o menos a 4 kilómetros de la biblioteca, y en la tarde los estudiantes van conmigo o llegan a mi casa y consultan, por lo menos algunos de ellos. Entonces es muy dinámico el papel de compartir, ¿no? Más cercano. Entonces, pienso que indudablemente el papel del docente, llámelo proactivo, como sea, es el mismo que ha planteado la esencia de la pedagogía desde hace muchos años. Era un comentario.
And I agree, and I'll just, well, again, I'll point you back to those ideas. I think you're right. The essence of being a high-quality teacher hasn't changed. I think the tools and the texts and the cultural forms, if you will, and the practices that we engage in, I think they will change in some way, but the underlying practices of good pedagogy and caring about kids and relevance and providing engaging, motivating kinds of scenarios, hopefully we're doing that in our classroom all of the time. So I hope that technology won't change that. Can I really quickly, and I don't know if I'm over my time, so stop me if I am. I know you didn't ask this, but I heard it asked before, and so I did very quickly want to just share with you the websites of 2 examples. If you're looking to partner with anyone in any class around the world, I would highly recommend you go to epals.com. And I mention this because you can select a language, you can select an age, and you can select a country or a continent. And this is just a quick screenshot of classrooms actually right here in Colombia that you either put your name out there and say, I have a class, we speak English, French, and Spanish, and I want to just talk with somebody else in the world. So you can just be pen pals, or you can join projects that are already set up to share information. So if you have access to the internet, even if it's only one computer, and really even if it's only at your house, your children can develop questions, construct a message, you communicate it to that other class, and then it comes back to you. There's a translator in the program or inside the web face. It also provides a safe email interface for you, all kinds of blog opportunities. So that is a free resource for you if you're interested. And the other one for older students is something called, and I don't quite know how to say this, it's an acronym, it's CIESE. It has to do with collaborative projects that focus on science and math and engineering. It's been going on for about 6 or 7 years. They set up the project, they set up the data collection, they set up the interface to share it, and you and your students go out and, let's say, collect water samples. Test the boiling point in your country and share it. Go collect samples of dirt and find the bugs that are in there and take pictures and share it. So again, even with one computer, you can access people around the world, build your content, and involve kids in content area learning. So I just wanted to mention that again. I know nobody asked, but maybe that's helpful.
Bien, tenemos espacio para la última pregunta. No sé quién tenga, bueno, por este lado que no habíamos.
Buenas tardes. Más que una pregunta, les voy a hacer un aporte. Soy docente, trabajo en el municipio de Tolú, departamento de Sucre, en la costa atlántica. Viendo todos estos proyectos, yo me pregunto, ¿cómo funcionamos? Y en realidad yo felicito a todos los docentes por esa labor tan bonita que nosotros hacemos y a veces hasta tan mal paga y tan mal remunerada, porque nosotros en unas condiciones en las que estamos allá con unas temperaturas de 37, 38 grados, donde los niños no tienen una sala de lectura con estas condiciones, donde no pueden producir como producen los niños de acá del interior. De pronto yo veo que hay unos proyectos lindísimos, pero si ustedes vieran el proyecto que traté de hacer allá en Tolú, rescatar las playas, rescatar los parques, entonces los niños los saco a leer a las playas. ¿Por qué? Para rescatar el ambiente en que ellos están. Entonces, si hay una oportunidad de mostrar lo que se está haciendo allá con la naturaleza, sería magnífico, y eso pensé que se iba a hacer en este intercambio. Entonces, ese era el aporte que les quería hacer.
And all of those things, I think you summed it up beautifully, is we're all high quality, caring teachers who are out there working hard daily. We don't get a lot of money. We get a lot of hassle. We don't have a lot of resources, but day in and day out, we have little people or big people who have really big minds and want to make a difference in the world. And if you can do things like that, whether or not it involves technology, it really doesn't matter. It's about encouraging learning and literacy and active engagement in a way that keeps kids in school and keeps them wanting to learn more. So thank you for summing up things.
Le agradecemos mucho a la profesora Coiro, un fuerte aplauso para ella por su ponencia.